Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jackie, and I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's Science on Tap. Science on Tap, you can do better than that. Let's hear it. I didn't get up here in my shit-kicking boots for nothing, y'all. All right, so tonight I am so excited that we have Dr. Nick Money to talk about molds and mushrooms and how they intersect with medicine and society. It is going to be a riveting, spore-filled talk, and I can't wait. And we at Science on Tap are super excited, not only because this is a perfect example of how we can bring science and culture together for you at events, it is something that we can also eat. So, I mean, that's just winning at life, right? Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Nicholas Money. Dr. Money is a professor at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, which is 3 location nouns that I did not think went together. But it turns out that Miami University is one of the oldest universities in the United States. At Miami University, he has built a successful career studying the explosive mechanisms by which molds and fungi can spread spores. But in addition to that work, he is the director of an interdisciplinary program that bridges the science and society, integrating multiple interests as he does in his other life. Now, outside of the regular academic rigors of a professor with departmental responsibilities and teaching and research, he also consults as a scientific expert on a variety of law cases. But in his copious spare time, he has the discipline to write every day. And with that discipline, he has produced a wide variety of books. Some on mycology, but some expanding to even bigger topics about how fungi actually are integrally involved in the coevolution of human beings, and really reflecting on the fact that billions of years of evolution have created a fascinating, diverse, exciting, intriguing, and endlessly studyable organism in fungi. He is also a passionate scholar of Milton, which you'll find is a connection that is not as far apart as you might think. When you look at his book that he is going to be signing after the talk tonight, Molds, Mushrooms, and Medicines, the opening line comes from Milton. And it's talking about how someday we'll be able to have mushrooms be explained to men. And I believe that Dr. Money has done a fabulous job in his career explaining fungi to all of us. So let's welcome to the stage, Dr. Money.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining me this evening. Who got the 10 out of 10? 9 out of 10. Nobody got 10? Oh. Okay, molds, mushrooms, and medicines. And to begin with what? The beginning of the greatest poem in the English language, written by John Milton, published in 1667. So I've amended some of the early lines from the poem to introduce this presentation this evening. Sing, heavenly muse, what in them is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of mushrooms to men. And this being the 21st century, so I'm told we'll amend that last line to humanity. So start with a lofty goal there. I'm going to talk about the human-fungus symbiosis, beginning with the fungi that grow on the surface of the body, and they form part of the mycobiome, which is the fungal component of our larger microbiome. and then travel all the way into the gut. And then I want to look at our relationship with the fungi beyond the body. So it's an extension of that idea of the mycobiome to our interactions with fungi in nature, both conscious and unconscious. So we're going to look at the mycobiome, or the human-fungus symbiosis, near and far. But before we do that, I need to introduce the fungi to you, because most of you here, according to your scores on the trivia, don't really know much about the fungi. So this is one of the questions, right? In fact, a single mushroom can release 30,000 spores a second, creating this fairy dust beneath the cap. And I've studied the way that spores are released, and biomechanics of these processes for quite a long time. And this is a fungus that interests me a lot, and I wanted to just talk about this briefly. It's the artillery fungus. And you can see how it works really just from these still images. It works as a cup within a cup, and the inner cup is pressurized and it springs outwards. And as it does so, it shoots a spore-filled capsule containing millions of microscopic spores over a distance of up to 6 meters. So that's the largest range of any fungus in terms of the distance that it shoots its spores. And it even creates an audible pop when it does so, if your hearing's really good. And I was hoping actually that there might be some children in the audience tonight that I could draw upon, but I'm going to need at least one. No, let's have 2 volunteers that are willing to come up to the stage and demonstrate the snap-through buckling mechanism of the artillery fungus. And there's a much better prize than the pint glass. Indeed, so if you have there, somebody's pointing. Young people, brilliant here. Come up and show us how the artillery fungus works. I must be the greatest consumer of these things. Completely unbiodegradable. Here we go. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, round of applause for the... Come here. So the way that you do this is you flip them outwards and stick them down. Hold that there for a moment. Ooh. Come around here and do this one. I'm sure this is worth it. This is going to be a... And if they don't behave, pick another one. You've got to flip it down. It should stick if you press it. There we go. Quite difficult, isn't it? There you go. You are going to deserve your prize. It's terrible. It took natural selection about 50 million years to figure this out. So the fact that you're doing it in 5 seconds is laudable. Now you let them go and maybe they'll work. There we go. The winner. The winner. The winner. Thank you, Amazon. Thank you. Jeff Bezos must make these in his basement, and they've got a high failure rate. You got one to work. You got one to work. There you go. Amazing. Thank you so much. And here's a gift for you. There we go. A gift for you and a gift for you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was worthwhile. Thank you. Yeah, but as I said, designed and perfected by natural selection. I actually have to do this. You can see these are high-speed images of the way that this works without sound. Wow. 10 meters a second, up to 6 meters. They're thrown through the air. They grow. You'll find them around here after rain, around landscaping mulch. Beautiful fungus. So just an example of the amazing intricate mechanisms that have evolved among the fungi for the purpose of reproduction, dispersing their spores. Now, fruit bodies, including mushrooms and the artillery fungus, then, they're produced by the feeding phase of the organism, the colony or mycelium that exists in the form of these tip-growing filaments called hyphae that branch. And we can see here they're thinner than a human hair, a tenth of a millimeter in diameter. And then my colleague Patrick Hickey, who works in Edinburgh, produced these lovely little video clips where he stained the individual cells with two different dyes that show the distribution of membrane and also the nuclei. Picture here. This is in real time. There's so much movement within these cells. We think of fungi as the embodiment of sluggishness and things that maybe crawl around slowly in basements, but there's so much movement within them. And one of the interesting areas of research right now relates to the whole issue of fungal consciousness, that they show so much sensitivity to their surroundings. And they're also capable, and that's shown in this picture here. You can see the way that these individual filaments move around obstacles, and they actually can sense tiny changes in the height of the surfaces over which they're growing. Amazing sensitivity. But they also show evidence of learning and memory. They remember where food is in their environment. And so one might regard this as a simple form of consciousness. And as I write in the book, the potential for communication is probably limited to the slow passage of chemical signals, and the fungus is unlikely to be relaying anything other than, "I'm hungry, I just found food, and will you mate with me?" This covers most of human discourse too. But you get the point. Fungi do not dream or dread. And look at this example of fungal consciousness. Patrick Hickey again. Bioluminescent. This a bioluminescent colony that's growing on wood chips. You can see this in the woods too. You might have done so. It's the phenomenon of foxfire. If you look look from the side, so your vision, so that you're looking with your rods rather than your cones, you'll see this pale green glow at night. Beautiful thing to look for. The pulse is this is actually speeded up. The pulses occur over the course of many minutes. All right. Fungi also grow in the form of yeasts. We can see here in this picture, this is brewer's yeast. Same thing as baker's yeast. And there's a mother cell toward the right-hand side of that image, and you can see where buds have broken off the surface of the cell. This is a mother cell, and she's produced daughter cells. Yeasts tend to grow in fluids or on surfaces, and as we'll see, they're important in our relationships with the fungi. So I'm going to give you 10 themes about the human-fungus symbiosis. Number one, interacting. We interact with the fungi before birth and after death, all the way through, from the womb to the tomb. I used to say when I spoke about indoor molds that we inhale fungal spores from first breath to last gasp, but the fungal interaction with the body is extended over this longer period of time. We know that we're interacting with fungi in the womb because we can amplify the DNA produced by yeasts from the meconium. So that's the first deposit from the newborn. We know that we know that the fetus is actually swallowing amniotic fluid, and in so doing is acquiring small concentrations of yeast. And rather than being a negative thing, this probably is very positive in terms of the early formatting of the immune system, preparing us, once we're born, to work with a universe of microorganisms, that we're born into this fungal, bacterial, viral soup. So this is some early tutoring that's going on, teaching us what we're going to encounter pretty soon. And then what have we got there? All of us in the room right now hopefully are in the red dot, dot, dot. We're in there somewhere. After death, if we're fortunate enough to receive no, I was going to say live burial. That was up there. No, we don't want that, do we? A natural burial. Fungi are involved in our decomposition in the bloat stage. The fungi that are present in the gut are important in breaking down our soft tissues. And then right at the end of the process, much later on, the most tenacious, toughest tissues, the hair and nails, the keratin, those are broken down by fungi, filamentous fungi, molds. I didn't tell you that, did I? When we talk about fungi where we can't see a fruit body, but just the form of a colony of filaments, we refer to that colloquially as a mold. And there's a lot of calories up here. I can't see, but I was going to say there's 2 cheeseburgers worth of calories in a head of hair. Not in mine, on mine, but I can see out there there's a few heads of hair. Two cheeseburgers worth of calories, and there's waiting there for the fungi, or will be when you're underground. Remember the 2 cheeseburgers, because we'll come back to that later. Touching. This is the oldest known human shoe, found in an Armenian cave. It's 5,500 years old. Shoes have a downside. Athlete's foot. So, the athlete's foot fungus. The highest level of biological diversity, genetic diversity of this organism is found in Africa, our birthplace. It's where we find the highest genetic diversity among current Homo sapiens. And anthropologists have put together a really interesting idea that when we left Africa, when we emerged from the Rift Valley, and we started to move into northerly climes, and then we started wearing shoes, we transformed this fungus. The fungus had existed for a long, long time as a harmless commensal that lived on the surface of the skin but didn't cause any problems. Then we started wearing shoes. We created this environment of higher temperatures and humidity. This provided the perfect environment for this fungus to begin to change and become a really irritating pathogen. We do this, and we have done this throughout our history as a species, that we've changed the activities of fungi, we've driven their microevolution through our cultural practices. There's a lot of examples of this that I discuss in the book, but the most topical one may be this, Candida auris, which was in the trivia as this fungus that causes a lethal human infection, very, very high mortality rate. It gets into the body through catheters. It's a hospital-acquired infection. The suggestion's been made that the reason that this fungus is such a problem is climate change. This thing has spread across the globe in just a few years. It's found everywhere now, and it's a real problem because it resists the available antifungal agents that we use to treat serious fungal infections. The suggestion's been made that climate change is to blame for this, and that's something that I disagree with. Not that I'm refuting climate change, but the average global temperatures increased by about 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is child's play for the fungi. It's too little to change their evolutionary trajectory. The idea of that, the climate change idea here, is that the fungi are becoming more resistant to growing at warmer temperatures, and so their Candida auris and other things have become adapted to growing in the human body. There's plenty of fungi that can grow at 37 degrees C, our body temperature. I don't believe this. There's something far more insidious going on, in my opinion, which is the use of antifungal agents, fungicides, in agriculture, that we use the same kinds of chemicals to control cereal rusts, fungi that grow on fruits like apples. we use these fungicides in enormous quantities. Millions of tons of these compounds are used in agriculture every year. This seems like a much more likely driver of fungal evolution, that we've had these organisms that have become resistant to those, they're called azole antifungals in agriculture. And so that's why, under these unusual circumstances of hospital-acquired infections, we can't treat them. They're resistant. That's what's happened in their evolutionary trajectory, and we've driven this through our agricultural practices. That's my hypothesis. Next theme, breathing. Right now we're breathing fungal spores, including those of Alternaria, which I call the asthma fungus. So the reason for that is that it's very widespread. Alternaria spores are found in our air supply globally, and they carry a protein on their surface called Alt-A1, and it's a pity we don't have more children in the audience. I could demonstrate this by scratching Alt-A1 into their arms, and many of them would react with a wheel and flare reaction. There's very, very widespread allergy to this protein. So we breathe these spores all the time. They're a very important cause of childhood asthma, probably asthma throughout our lives. Proteins, this is a quote from the book, proteins called allergens on the surface of spores are as damaging to asthmatic lungs as birds sucked into jet engines. They're the missing link in respiratory medicine, ignored in favor of pollen. We hear about pollen and pet dander all the time. I've got whole books on my shelf on asthma that don't mention fungal spores. Why is this? The evidence is very, very strong that fungal spores are a very important stimulus for asthma attacks. There's a protein then carried on the spore surface that unlocks the release of histamines from mast cells and basophils in the lungs. I think I've induced an asthma attack just by talking about it there. Next theme, spreading. It gets worse, but I won't show you any yucky pictures. You can Google image search and you'll find enough things to, I don't know, fill your nightmares for the rest of your days. Most of the fungi that go into the lungs are dealt with our immune system, and they're removed on the conveyor belt of mucus that ends up going into the stomach, and the fungi die in that acid bath. But if the immune system's compromised, these fungi can get going, they can penetrate pretty much any of the tissues throughout the body. And this is showing filaments of a fungus or mold that's in the gut lining in this picture here. I forgot to use this, didn't I? There we go. Some of the fungi that cause the worst infections are everywhere. They're growing on food scraps in our kitchens right now. You can find them on tomatoes and other fruits. And these are species of Mucor and Rhizopus. And if you look up infections caused by those fungi, again, you'll see these awful facial infections. And I'm not going to shock you with pictures like that. But these fungi are everywhere. I thought maybe somebody had inserted a slide there. Yeah. I remember going to a lecture years ago by a pathologist, and he showed the pictures. There's no need. We've got an imagination. Not of fungal infections, but anyway, I digress. Fungi, including this one, cause some of the foulest flesh-melting diseases ever pictured in a pathology textbook. Mycoses, fungal infections, kill up to 1.5 million humans a year. This thing, so either a Mucor or a Rhizopus, was responsible for the black fungus infections in India during the COVID pandemic. What happened there is that lots of people were treated with steroids to lower their immune systems, to control their response to the viral infection, but that also provided an invitation to these fungi. So fungal infections. Very important. How many calories in the human brain? More than a roast chicken. So it compares with the hair, more than a roast chicken. The brain at autopsy is often filled with fungi, particularly in patients that have suffered from Parkinson's disease and other neurological illnesses. We don't know why this is. There's a suggestion from some researchers in Spain that there's a cryptic brain mycobiome that's up there all the time. And then just after death, they really get growing. We don't know. This is cutting-edge research. We don't know if there are fungi there in low concentrations in the healthy brain. But we'll find out. This is the way that science works. I don't know when, but this will be unraveled over time. This raises the issue of cause versus effect. If we find fungi in the brain associated with a condition, did they cause it or are they a consequence? And we'll come back to that issue shortly. Digesting, next theme. 10 to 40 billion yeasts in the gut versus 40 trillion bacteria. In the early versions of the Wikipedia page about the microbiome, the suggestion was made, well, there's only 3 orders of magnitude fewer fungal cells in the gut, mostly yeast, than there are bacteria. But that elides the point that the fungi are the giants of the microbial world. If we look at the surface area of the fungi moving through the gut, that's equivalent to, or can be, at the level of 40 billion yeasts, to the surface of an 8-person dining room table moving through the gut. That provides an enormous surface area for interactions with our immune system. And that might explain why there are associations between changes in the yeasts in our guts and all kinds of inflammatory conditions, inflammatory bowel disease, and then all the way up to bowel cancer. Cause versus effect. Watch this space. Oh, I've got a drink. It's actually an NA beer. I wrote a book called Rise of Yeast, and now I don't drink alcohol. It's another casualty of the pandemic. My name is Nick Money, and I'm a recovering human. Digesting, where were we? 10 billion yeast. It's no more than a raisin in terms of its mass, but this big surface area. So watch this space. The research is ongoing, moving fast, nourishing. We know that fungi are an important part of our diet. They're involved in the fermentation of all of these foods that we see in the slide here, from cheeses, alcoholic fermentation, soy sauce, all kinds of traditional Asian foods like tempeh and so forth. But I live in Ohio, so this is a frightening slide for anybody in Ohio. I'm probably the only person in Ohio that's eaten corn. Mycoprotein. You should eat this. Chicken nuggets. Save the broiler chicken. This reduces the net suffering in the universe by eating this product. Chicken nuggets, corn. The fungus is this one. It's a fusarium. It's a mold. And it was discovered here in a village called Marlow Bottom in Buckinghamshire, which, don't think of Grantchester. It's not like that. I went there on a pilgrimage earlier this year because this was where, it's not like Grantchester because the traffic is awful. Anyway, it's got a really nice sign though with a kingfisher, Marlow Bottom. This was where the corn fungus was discovered in the 1960s and has created, it's a revolution in the food industry. And I think they should change the sign. It should say, Marlow Bottom, the birthplace of biotechnology, because they grow this thing in these giant airlift fermenters producing 1,500 tons in in a run. It's an amazing product. Other places that might have that on their road sign, birthplace of biotechnology. Cincinnati, place where the first yeast plant was established on the banks of the Ohio River by the Fleischmann brothers in the 19th century. Very enterprising immigrants from Europe. Still for sale today, Fleischmann's yeast, right? The Fleischmann brothers. What else? South San Francisco, they've actually got a sign that says the birthplace of biotechnology, and Genentech paid for that years ago, so they would claim. But anyway, Marlow Bottom's up there. The fungi as a whole are worth $1.5 trillion to the US economy. Our GDP is, looking down here, well, it's north of 20 trillion now. So it's 5% of our economy is based on the activities of fungi, baking and brewing and so forth. That's greater than the automobile industry. All right, a couple more themes here. Treating. I don't want to talk too much about this or I'll get in trouble. I wrote an article published in 2016 that still gets me hate mail. And I was threatened with lawsuits over this. The title was, "Are Mushrooms Medicinal?" My conclusion was no. Didn't get me any fans. But I wouldn't change, really, a word of that article because the evidence is still lacking that the claims like this, that the lion's mane mushroom provides memory and nerve support. We could talk about this in the Q&A. There are definitely some fascinating experiments that have been performed on cultured nerve cells that suggest that compounds in lion's mane, certain strains, can promote nerve growth. There are some unpleasant experiments on rodents that are kind of intriguing, but the evidence is still not there, and that's the point. I want to see more research, critical research, clinical trials that might establish these relationships. But I'm actually really optimistic about this field, this market sector, because of my knowledge of the fungi. We look at the fungi in the woods. These are bird's nest fungi, so a bit bigger than the artillery fungus. They look like sort of impossibly small bird's nests, a couple of millimeters in diameter, and the eggs are spore-filled capsules, and they're splashed into the air by raindrops. Absolutely beautiful. Beautiful. You'll find these everywhere. You could probably find them in landscaping mulch outside the theater here. Beautiful. These fungi are a source of very potent antibacterial antibiotics. They've never been brought to market, but they've been studied by chemists and pharmacologists for decades. Fungi are brimming with interesting, useful compounds that interact with human physiology. They just haven't been studied enough. They haven't been demonstrated to be effective in human patients. But they're out there. Look at the way that the fungi, they must interact with everything else in nature, all of their surroundings. They're going to be producing compounds that affect us. Of course, we know that fungi are the source of many important drugs, other antibacterial antibiotics, drugs that affect the nervous system, and we're using genetically modified fungi to produce all kinds of drugs, including human insulin. Half of the world's injectable insulin is produced by genetically modified yeast. So the fungi are important. Ooh. On the dinner menu this evening, hopefully not, death cap mushrooms. They demonstrate unambiguously the way that fungi interact with human biochemistry. And onwards into a topic that I know very little about, but you do here. Alice volat proprius, fly with her own wings. So that's Oregon. So all of you have consumed this evening, which is probably why you did so poorly on the Q&A, on the trivia. Anyway, psilocybin in actually a few hundred species of magic mushrooms is converted to psilocin when it enters the bloodstream, and that's, as you know from the trivia, is a serotonin mimic and has these profound effects upon our nervous systems, our cognition. This is a field brimming with non-scientific thinking, and also going back to the trivia, the mention of Terence McKenna. In the book, I say that, and I went back and looked at a lot of this literature. Some of it was amusing, some of it was frustrating. Terence McKenna, whose pronouncements on alien mushrooms are one of the least enlightening things ever written about fungi. And there's been a lot of unenlightening things written about fungi. But getting into that literature made me think. So some of you might know this famous painting, Planquereau Chapel in central France. 13th century wall painting interpreted in about 1970 as, takes us back to Milton, of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, till one greater man restore the blissful seat. Sing, heavenly muse, and that's what I quoted. In any case, Eve is being offered the forbidden fruit by the serpent from, some people said, an umbrella pine, but then the suggestion was made it's a giant mushroom tree, and it was, this can't possibly be true. My wife and I, some years ago, took the classic American middle-class misadventure to the Loire Valley. Wouldn't be much use to me now, given that I drink NA beer, would it? And I figured out that Planquereau Chapel was fairly close by, so we drove. It wasn't close by, it was 3 or 4 hours. We got there, it was closed. And on the door was a card written in French. It wouldn't have been in Egyptian, would it? It was in French. And I managed to decode it, go to the farmhouse. So I went to the farmhouse, and there was a guy there, I kid you not, with a shotgun, and his dog was barking at me, and we never got in. So I've never seen it in person. Anyway, it's all about me, isn't it? There we go. But more recent scholarship on these wall paintings, I've got to admit, what were these medieval artists depicting? Look at this thing. Saint-Martin de Vic. Look at the monk here. He's harvesting mushrooms, isn't he? Underneath the table, this is the Last Supper. The tunics, right, of the disciples, they're folded in a very mushroomy way. What was he saying? He or she, what was the artist saying? Look at this one, another one. 11th, 12th century. Those must be mushrooms. So you got Christ celebrating the Eucharist here, and those are mushrooms, aren't they? What was going on there? So I'm really interested in this, the possibility that maybe if we look back into the deep history of Christianity, and we look at the Desert Fathers and the diversity of different forms of early Christianity, maybe some of those had some roots in mushroom worship. It seems plausible. No evidence for this, but what were they trying to show in these paintings? So this is I've never consumed magic mushrooms because this is the way things look. 24/7. Why would I want them? Yeah. In any case, hopefully this is your experience. Last theme here, our interactions with the fungi, recycling. We're dependent upon the activities of the fungi as decomposers. It's filamentous fungi and yeasts that spin the carbon cycle, fungi that interact with trees then, mycorrhizal fungi. We depend on them. Plants All of Earth's botany is dependent on the activities of these fungi. And I've just realized I need a copy of my book to read a brief passage for you. Anybody got a copy? Or maybe I'll have you read it. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. So I said there that sustain Earth's botany. What's the greatest extension of the mycobiome? Well, we got it to the moon. This is a jettison bag from one of the Apollo missions that contained the waste from the astronauts. I want to get back, I'm not going to go myself, but I want somebody to go and bring back the jettison bags because we've got freeze-dried samples of astronaut feces that contain their mycobiome. We could amplify this and see, find out what. Probably not a lot, but at least find out. Look, we got the fungi to the moon. But this being the story of the fungi, our interactions near and far, I'm just going to read you very briefly here. So I said Earth's botany. You know, we don't know that there is botany elsewhere. Probably not. Well, maybe. It's a big place. He says magnanimously, it's a big place, the universe. Ooh. So, let's actually take me back to Terence McKenna. He'd like this. Kepler 1649 is an Earth-sized planet in the constellation Cygnus, 300 light years from our solar system. With its close orbit to a small star, climate models suggest it's quite Earth-like in temperature. Kepler 1649 is watery, it seems likely to harbor life, and if it accommodates anything more complicated than our bacteria, it's certain to be populated with fungi. Confidence in this untestable hypothesis is born from understanding the essence of fungi on Earth. Our fungi are the agents of entropy, transforming the energy captured in the web of life into the raw materials for the continuous regeneration of the biosphere. Without a group of organisms with these properties, the ecosystems of rocky worlds like Kepler 1649c would stall as planetary compost heaps of untappable energy. They must be there. So this is the story of the fungi near and far. They are everywhere and will outlive us by an eternity. In mycospiramus, in fungi we trust. Thank you.
Now, this is Portland, Oregon, and as you may know, in addition to being a mushroom-friendly city, we also have a lot of tattoos. So would you consider getting In Fungi We Trust tattooed on your body?
Where? Where would I do that? Suggestion? Are you offering?
Oh, I'm just curious.
That would get at autopsy. Interesting. Could use the Google Translate now, right? Interesting. In Fungi We Trust. Well, anyway.
I think you should make your own currency that says In Fungi We Trust.
You know, this is the best business opportunity, I think, of the evening.
Excellent. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to enter our Q&A portion of the evening. And first, I need to lay down the rules of the Q&A portion of the evening. Rule number 1 is your question should end in a question mark. Rule number 2 is that your question should be singular. And rule number 3, this is not the place to provide a detailed narrative of what happened when you took mushrooms, all right? That is a special rule for tonight. All right, so with having said that, what we'll do is I will ask the first question, then I'm going to run around. Raise your hand. I will do some light triage, try and make sure I get to all portions of the auditorium. I will be holding the microphone as much as possible for a variety of reasons I won't go into, but please do not try and grab it out of my hand lest you dislocate my elbow. All right, so my question to you is, we ended on the discussion of fungi in space. And as you know, we have sent probes into space that have carried artifacts of humanity, works of art, recordings of some of our music. I'm curious if any fungi were part of the biological specimens, or if fungi are sneaky enough to get through NASA's decontamination protocols to sneak on board a vessel.
I don't know the answer to that in terms of whether we've sent the glories of the fungi into outer space. They certainly weren't mentioned on those etchings that were on the Voyager spacecraft. But interesting. I don't know the answer to that in terms of more recent missions, if they've gone for some broader view of biological diversity that included the most important organisms on Earth. Yeah.
We'll start a campaign.
The fungi, so that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, good question.
Next question.
Have you seen or played The Last of Us? And if so, what are your thoughts on the realism of that?
Wow, where do we start? I haven't actually seen it, but I know some about it, and there's a lot in there that's implausible, other than the fact that when fungi do grow in the human brain, they're probably capable of changing some of our behavioral algorithms. But yeah, in terms of the fungi that they talked about there, so this was based on some of the fungi that infect insects and create this fantastic climbing behavior, and they burst through the head of the ant or other insect and then disperse their spores. I don't think so. Yeah.
Next.
But they get us anyway, yeah.
Next question.
You kind of scared us with all the kind of scared us with all the talk about the most deadly spores are on, the tomatoes and whatever in our backyard. So what is it that prevents them from actually normally affecting us? What are our natural defenses, and then what happens differently when somebody does die from such a thing? It's the immune system, but it's also our defenses in terms of the skin barrier. So we see that actually some of these awful infections occur after a severe burn, that it's just that physical damage to the skin, to the epidermis, that gives these fungi the opportunity to really get going. But the simple answer is it's our immune defenses that actually keep them at bay. But we see other changes too, in terms of when our blood sugar, when our blood chemistry changes through a condition like untreated diabetes. Yeah, fungi are pretty interested, actually other microorganisms too, become really interested in the chemistry of our bloodstream under those conditions. So it's a whole series of changes in the body that provide this invitation. But they're waiting to go right now. It's just...
Next question.
Worship a healthy immune system.
Next question.
Going back to the astronaut poop, there's been a lot of activity around gut bacteria or flora replacement, consuming capsules of, fecal matter. Any thoughts on that? I mean, does it work? Is it practical?
There's one probiotic that's fungal that's proven to work in clinical trials, and it's a yeast. It's related to brewer's yeast, and it can be used to treat traveler's diarrhea, to reset the gut. You can buy this in pharmacies. You don't need a prescription, and apparently it really works. So that's an example of taking a fungus in the oral route, and it actually can affect the activity in the gut. Other claims probably being stretched they stretch our credulity, they stretch the scientific evidence. But yeah, Boulardii is the traveler's diarrhea treatment. Yeah.
Next question in the back.
Bacteria are now known to live deep in the earth, a mile or two, and also some very extreme environments such as boiling hot springs in Yellowstone. Are there examples of fungi living in such incredible environments?
It's a great question. So the short answer is no, they can't do quite as well. We see that in the bacterial, the prokaryotic world, that they can do really well in hot springs and so forth. But there are fungi that indeed grow under some extraordinary conditions. I did some work years ago with an Indian scientist who was collecting fungi from an area, the Western Ghats in India, that was affected by forest fire. And he sent me spores of these fungi. We actually put them in an oven and baked them and then got them out. They germinated in about 6 minutes. So absolutely incredible. So fungal spores they're not active under those really hot conditions, but they can survive very, very punishing environmental circumstances. Yeah.
Next question to your left.
What are you most excited about, and what are you most concerned about when you think about the future of mushrooms?
Wow, good question. Most excited about. I'm really interested in this phenomenon of consciousness, which is a desperately difficult area to get into without losing all sense of science or sanity. But it's really interesting there, thinking about the degree to which we can apply the concepts of consciousness to microorganisms. I find that really fascinating. The fact that they can actually learn and have some kind of memory about, spatial memory, that really fascinates me. What am I most worried about? I'm most worried about us, Homo sapiens. There's too many of us and we're causing too much damage, but that's,
Next
we
question.
are the selfish ape.
You talked about the Wood Wide Web and all these networks in the air and the earth. I'm curious to hear a little bit about mushrooms in the water, in the ocean. Is that a thing? I've never actually thought about it.
Great. There are a few, and actually one of them was studied here in Oregon. It's actually a mushroom that fruits in freshwater streams underwater. So how does its spores get released? And so air bubbles collect around the gills, and then as they go downstream, they'll carry spores with them. That's absolutely fascinating. But there's all kinds of fungi that live in aquatic environments and amazing diversity of organisms. Gorgeous things to look at under the microscope. But yeah, there are mushrooms that fruit underwater. Amazing.
Next question.
Hi, I've seen mushroom-based packaging. What are your thoughts on bioengineering with mycelium?
Bioengineering of mycelium. There's all kinds of applications that have been tested, right, using mycelial products to create bricks that might be used in buildings or packaging, biodegradable packaging. A lot of what I've seen though, it's engineers talk about entropic analysis, which is really how much energy you're putting in to get actually to produce this thing, and they're pretty intensive. You've got to supply them with a lot of food, and they grow quite slowly. I think we're not there yet, but hey, perhaps. I'm a skeptic. That's the true answer.
Next question.
You showed early on the video of the bioluminescent mushrooms that were kind of pulsing. Can you maybe explain that behavior?
Yeah, and actually what I didn't say is, what's the function of this? So we have a lot of bioluminescent fungi actually in the tropics. Former student actually of mine actually ended up working in Brazil on this. The best evidence suggests that it's got something to do with insect attraction. But the experiments are not really clear. So that's probably that's the prevailing hypothesis. It's something to do with attracting insects if their visual system can detect these wavelengths. But interesting phenomenon. The pulsing, I don't know, it's pulsing, they're pulsing every few minutes, so it's not fast. That may have something to do with underlying metabolic rhythms that are relevant. It's quite an energy-intensive thing to actually do this. So they're not doing this for fun. There must be some function to this.
Next question.
Hi, I understand plants, animals, and fungi are all within their own kingdoms within the domain of eukaryotes. Can you elaborate more on how fungi became their own branch in the evolutionary tree?
Yeah, so we share, so we're more close, animals are more closely related to fungi than we are to plants. That divergence, so then when the ancestor, what was the common ancestor that produced all of the animals and all of the fungi? Probably it was about 1 billion years ago, or 1.2, 1.3 billion years ago. But if you go way, way back into our microbial history, yeah, we share that common ancestor, which is fantastically interesting. That means that some of our chemistry is quite similar. And that's one of the reasons it's quite difficult to treat fungal infections, is that they've got, when we develop drugs to treat fungal infections, or there's some really interesting new ones that have been ongoing investigations, they're quite toxic. So we end up with liver or kidney damage because of this similarity in our physiology. But yeah, it's intriguing, isn't it, that we share that history, some of it.
Next question.
Hey, yeah, I wondered, has Ed Yong ever talked to you about his sensory biology research that he did to write The Immense World?
What in particular? I've actually never spoken to him. I know the book very well, but I mean, his book then, I mean, that was focusing, it's a few years old now, it was definitely focusing on the bacterial component of the microbiome. The work on the fungi is most of it is quite recent in relative terms, and so, no, have him give me a call. We'll have a long chat.
Next question.
You mentioned Terence McKenna earlier. Have you looked into the stoned ape theory, and is there any evidence to support that at all, or is it completely unsubstantiated?
Completely unsubstantiated. Completely. Who's the famous podcaster that's into this? Yeah, I mean, that tells you everything, right? There is no possible basis, scientific basis for this, because he's convinced by this. We could talk more about it. I do mean to be flippant, but there is more to my opinion than I can indicate in a brief answer.
Next question.
Hi, so you mentioned that you did some research and you've stopped drinking since then. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that, and maybe is there a connection with why you've never felt the need to try psilocybin from your research?
The reason that I've never tried magic mushrooms is that I don't think it's related. It's not related. Yeah, they're separate things. But the reason why I've never tried magic mushrooms is that it's such a sensitive mechanism. I don't want to screw with that. It was Richard Feynman actually was asked this question. A lesser scientist, of course, but he opined something like that it was his favorite organ and that he didn't want to do anything that would disturb it. And Feynman actually never drank or did anything of that nature.
But he could play a mean bongo.
He could play a mean bongo, apparently. Yeah.
Next question.
So there are some molds like Cladosporium and Ulocladium that are found in grassy yard areas outside, which obviously we breathe and we're totally fine with. Are those kind of molds fine to breathe inside? Let's say they're growing inside a house, or is it only black molds that are toxic? What makes a mold fine outside but bad inside? Is it only black molds, or are there a million other molds that we can't breathe inside?
Yeah, and so you mentioned Cladosporium. Was that one you mentioned? Yeah. Cladosporium. So Cladosporium actually does really well in homes when they're wet. Cladosporium will grow, wet carpet, for example, does really, really well. So it just needs it needs propitious conditions, which food source and moisture. But these fungi in nature are degrading plant materials. We then use plant materials in our home, obviously, and in our textiles and furniture and so forth. So it's the addition of moisture changes everything. But actually, the diversity of fungi that grow in homes is astonishing. Actually, it's incredible. If you actually carry out some genetic analysis of the fungal particles in the air in a home, especially after water damage, yeah, it's a rainforest. It's amazing. Lots of stuff up there.
One question. Next question.
Hi. You mentioned the Candida and your hypothesis that climate change is not related to its evolution of resistance, and I wonder if that also applies to your thoughts on the chytrid fungi that are causing amphibian death, and are they affected by climate change? Because that was what I originally heard was the cause of that.
Yeah. So Climate change is absolutely changing the distribution of fungi, and that's important in terms of the fungi that infect us. There's a nasty thing here in North America, blastomycosis. Climate change is probably changing its distribution, and we see that may be part of the story in the stress on amphibian populations that then makes them vulnerable to infection by this particular, it's an aquatic fungus called a chytrid. So climate change is really important, but in the distribution of fungal diseases, I just don't think things have got bad enough yet in terms of global temperatures for the fungi to give they're doing fine.
Next question.
Yes, I'm confused how fungus do it for a number of reasons. I've heard that fungus have thousands of sexes.
Yeah.
But setting that aside, I'm more interested in the alternation of generations that you see in more so plants and less so animals, and if that's present in the fungal kingdom as well.
Absolutely. So we see that in the fungi. What's amazing about some of the fungi, the molds, is that they have these different expressions. It's one set of genes, it's one genome, but they can change totally. They can be producing spores asexually under some conditions. We call those conidia, and they're released into the air. And then under other conditions, they can actually mate and form a completely different kind of spore by producing a fruit body. So yeah, it's absolutely, it is amazing, and it's actually screwed with taxonomy and nomenclature, because sometimes fungi, the same fungus, the same genome, has been given multiple names. So,
next question.
One approach to your question.
Yeah, I guess this was more general with the microbiome. I don't know if it's specific to fungi, but there's like recent headlines talking about the microbiome's connection to the brain and dementia, Alzheimer's, that kind of thing. I haven't read much on it, but I was just curious what your thoughts are on that, like recent research or whatever.
Definitely going to have to read this. Definitely going to have to read this. There's an audio version too, audible version that I did. Yeah, that was an experience. So yeah, there's a whole chapter on this. So read that and then send me an email and tell me
all right, this is going to be
you agree with it.
Our last question of the evening.
Yeah, so accepting your agricultural, like antifungal hypothesis for the increase in that particular hospital-acquired thing, are there any alternatives for farmers to control those funguses that isn't just like kind of kicking the evolutionary adaptation can down the road?
It's a beautiful question, because it relates to all of our interactions with nature in agriculture and other settings. There may be no alternative to this. It's the case of, what can we do to control crop diseases, to grow healthy crops without destroying ourselves and without ruining the rest of the biosphere? There are no easy answers, but your question's a great one, because if we look at the fungicides that we use, the antifungal agents to control our diseases, most of the effective ones have been these azoles. That's what we use in agriculture. So, good question.
All right. I am sorry that we weren't able to get to all of the questions tonight, but Dr. Money will be signing his book at the front of the theater at the conclusion of this evening. So I encourage you to check it out, buy his book. It's fantastic, and it is a very, very enjoyable and enlightening read. For all of those who got 6 and above on the quiz, please come up to the front to collect your pint glass, and let's give another huge round of applause for Dr. Money. Thank you and good night.